Jesse said, my name is Jen Green. I am with the Office of Student Fellowships and Awards. So I work primarily with undergraduates, with the exception of the Fulbright program and the National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship. However, I'm on loan to the graduate school right now. In my previous role, I was back in New York State. I worked a lot with graduate students, and I like to take the opportunity to get to interact with graduate students when I can. So I am guest speaking today, I suppose, even though I feel like I'm low-key kind of a member of the graduate team, like I've invited myself in. So, and this is a three-part series that we developed. Uh-oh, it was working before, where'd it go? Oh, no, it was Jesse Singleton?
Okay, we don't need to click on it.
Oh, okay. Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
click on the window, you should be okay.
my bad. And I'm being all lazy, so like you had to get up from the back, okay.
You're good.
So,
I got you.
this grant writing skills series that we developed is designed to give you the basics of grant writing. So a couple of weeks ago, we did how to do an effective and efficient search for funding. And that is available out on YouTube, I believe. There's a recording.
Right.
This week, obviously, we're talking about, research statements, like how to talk about your research, how to sell your research, pitch your research. Let's say pitch, sell almost sounds like, I don't know. Even pitch is like pushing it, right? But we really want to give you these basic skills that you can apply for most any award, that are for people in most any discipline, and that are for folks with any citizenship. The awards I do work with for graduate students, the Fulbright and the National Science Foundation, unfortunately, those are only open to US citizens and in some cases permanent residents, right? But I often have international students who are like, well, what if I want that skill set, but I'm not applying for those awards? So that's kind of how this idea was born. And if you want to mark your calendars, like I said, we already had session 1, but we have some grant writing mini retreats coming up, and they'll be in this room, and you can just show up, write, and there'll be folks around, in case you have any questions as you're working on any applications that you might be writing at the moment. On February 27th, we're going to have our final installment of the workshops, which is going to be on the art of the personal statement. I'm hoping we have some good attendance for that one, because a lot of times I think people are unnecessarily intimidated by the personal statement. So we're going to try to demystify that a little bit. And then there'll be 2 more grant writing mini retreats after that. And we also have some incentives for folks who participate in the entire series, and Jesse will talk about that a little later. So the purpose of a research statement, and like, okay, so this can be termed a lot of different things in the greater scheme of a fellowships application. They might call it a statement of purpose. They might call it a research essay. They might call it a research statement. But typically, when you are applying for funding of any sort, there's going to be a section of the application where you talk about yourself, and there's going to be a section of the application where you talk about your research. Sometimes they might combine them, and that's like super tricky. It can be done, right? Like you basically take principles of the research statement and the personal statement, and you're kind of bringing them all together. But really, this is, the personal statement is about you, the researcher. A research statement is straight up about your research. So really what you're telling them is what you're going to do with this funding. And you really want to convince them that you're a safe bet, right? Your research is cool, it's important, you have a plan, and you are the person to carry out that plan. So definitely conveying the importance of your research is huge. Now what's funny is you all will be like, I mean, my research is not that important. I'll be like, well, tell me what your research is. And they'll be like, well, I'm creating this device that can send biodata to doctors for people who are homebound. And I'm like, okay, that's huge. Like, that's super important. And this was like before the pandemic that I had a student working on this. And he was always like, I mean, the other thing I should state, right, is that research takes on many forms. I'm a humanist by training. My background's in art history. So, the way I define research would be different than the way like a bench scientist is going to define research. We all have some version of it. You could even take research and sub-creative activity. I've had students use these same principles to talk about an art installation that they wanted to complete overseas. So, again, this series is really meant to give you like solid basic skills in grant writing. But I think a big part of this is that your research is important and that you're a safe bet. And you also have to really demonstrate how your research, oh my gosh, I made supports possessive and it's totally not supposed to be, and that's super embarrassing. But anyhow, like all of this has to be packaged in a way that demonstrates that you are a fit for their goals, like you and your research are a fit. And honestly, I should probably move that one to the top, but it's like all these things have to come together to show them that. You have to be really mindful, I think particularly for graduate students, because your research is something you work on all the time. You need to remember they don't know the intimate details of your research, and they won't inherently see how your research fits their goals. You have to break it down for them, and to the point where it almost feels silly. But I always tell my students to remember, particularly at the national level, when applications are being reviewed, they may have as many as like 50, 60, 70 files that they're reviewing. So your eyes got so big. You want to make sure you're not making them work for anything. Like they're not having to work to find information. So you're just gonna be like, bam, first paragraph, this is why my work's important. And this is why it fits the goals of your funding agency. So, and you write something obviously very differently if you were applying for the National Science Foundation versus the Association of American University Women, right? Like AAUW is definitely going to want to know how this affects women and girls, why it's important, or how you are doing things to reach women and girls. Whereas the NSF, they're looking to fund the next generation of STEM researchers. But I have students who very possibly could be applying for both of those funding mechanisms. So that leads me to my next point. Make every research statement you write, and this goes for personal statements too, make it specific to the award you're pursuing. Students will often ask me, they're like, well, I can just reuse this, right? I'm like, oh, no, because think how different the funding opportunities can be. The audiences will be very different, like in terms of who's reviewing the applications. But what you want to do is spend some real time and thought thinking about that funder's goals so you can shape your discussion. But whatever you do, the second one should see research statement. Sorry, you guys. There's nothing worse than realizing you have typos in your slide that I shouldn't even say it out loud because you wouldn't know if I hadn't said anything. I'd be like, yes, statement of purpose. So doing a deep dive on the award or awards of interest is super important. My biggest piece of advice, if you're trying to figure out how to shape your discussion of your research, is to spend a lot of time at their website. So say I was looking at the American Association of University Women, I would go out there, I would look at like the full eligibility criteria, I'd look at their mission statement, or sometimes that'll be the about section of their website. I think you can learn a lot from looking at the application materials they're requesting. And in this case, American Association of University Women is a really good example. It's a dissertation writing award. If you look, they're requesting a statement about your research, a personal statement about you, and a separate statement about commitment to women and girls. So that tells you right there where their priorities are centered. If you look at the National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship, they're asking for a 3-page personal statement versus a 2-page research statement. So that shows you they're super interested in who you are as a person. Like they're perhaps even more interested in you, the researcher, than your research. So spend a little time with that as well. Do look at profiles of previous recipients, but I always tell students, look, don't stare. Because the moment you start staring, the imposter feelings are going to seep in and you're gonna be like, oh my gosh, I didn't cure cancer when I was 17 years old. I'm never going to get this award. Don't go there, but it does give you a sense of the kinds of research that they funded in the past. Like, if you look out there and there's no humanities projects funded and you're a humanist, you're gonna be like, So something to think about there too. Because sometimes even if they say a particular discipline is eligible, you can see a very clear trend toward the types of projects that they're selecting. And definitely if they have the review criteria out there, take a look at that, or if they have any information about the review process. A lot of times you won't be able to find that information, but by all means, if it's there, you certainly want to use it. I think talking to faculty who serve on review panels for awards at the national level can be really helpful. You'll notice I'm focusing this on nationally competitive awards, but these principles apply to a lot of other things that you might be pursuing, that are UTEP specific or specific to the UT system. And then I always caution, how, against blindly accepting advice from previous recipients. Blindly accepting sounds so loaded, but basically be careful, tread lightly, because when you're talking to a previous recipient, they usually have one data point, and that's themselves. And that's what they submitted on, that one day, that 1 year that was reviewed by this one group of people. And so it can be a little tricky, because they're going to, basically they're sharing their experience. It's not necessarily the experience that other folks have had applying for that award. So definitely talk to them, absolutely, but at the end of the day, it's your work, it's what you want to submit. It's something that you want to put together in a way that represents you effectively and authentically, right? And I think it's a little easy too sometimes to get really focused on what they submitted and how they did it. Instead of thinking about how you want to go about it within, the parameters of a particular funding agency. So you want to always follow the prompts correctly, or carefully. This is another thing, and I do this myself when I write stuff. I'll see research statement and I'll be like, bah, 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 and I just start writing. There's always a prompt under it, usually in italics, right? Read it. It's something I have the applicants I'm working with do is copy it and paste it into the Word document where they start writing. So it's right there front and center the entire time they're working on this. I am also a huge fan of outlining before you start writing. Now, what's funny is I'm gonna date myself because I don't think outlining is taught as actively as it used to be. But you can find stuff online on how to outline, but it's basically outlining paragraph by paragraph, what you're going to talk about where, and within those paragraphs, some of the key points that you're going to make. But it really helps you figure out what you want to put where. And I'll give you some advice on what to put where in a general sense. And outlining is one of those things where do I always do it? No. Is my writing better when I do? Absolutely. So taking a beat to think about, how you're going to introduce your points can be extremely helpful. And again, outlining was drilled into me as an elementary and middle school student. That is a thing of the past. I am a child of the 80s and 90s. So, but you can find good resources online about outlining if it's something you want to learn more about. And you'll see outlines that are really detailed. I just, like I said, here's what this paragraph's going to be about, or this general section, and then here's some of the main ideas I'm going to bring up. So yeah, and then I would recommend copying and pasting the prompt into the document that you're working on, whether it's your outline or once you've moved from the outline to the actual essay, keep that front and center. It's really easy to lose sight of it. In fact, I think as I'm sitting here thinking about it, I'm like, I gotta take my own advice on all of these things. I'm working on a big writing project right now for the NSF, and I'm like, So, but some of the, the key things that need to be addressed in a research statement, what do you want to do with the funding, and how does what you're proposing fit the mission of the award, the spirit of an award? When I say spirit of the award, I mean, think about it in terms of this, within reason, you're bending your research to fit this, not the other way around, right? You're going to bend to fit whatever they happen to be looking for. And there are times where maybe that might not work out. At the last session, I used the example, I was working with a student who was applying for a dissertation writing award, and he applied for an award in Buddhist studies, and he doesn't do Buddhist studies. So I was like, why are you applying for an award in Buddhist studies? And he was like, well, one of the chapters mentions Buddhist studies. And I was like, no. That's not in the spirit of the award. They are looking for people who are all in Buddhist studies, not I work on film and this one time I thought about Buddhist studies in reference to this one thing. So you also want to be you want to be honest with yourself, but then once you've kind of decided on the awards you want to pursue, remember that you're bending it to fit them. And again, you think about your research every day. So like, I think trying to think about it the way someone else might can be a little challenging, but it's very, very important. But yes, why is your research important? I challenge you to think about the implications both in your field and beyond. I think a lot of you are able to articulate fairly effectively how it's going to push your field forward, but I don't know if you all spend much time thinking about how it's going to affect society as a whole. And chances are it will in some way. But I'm a humanist again, right? Art history, early 20th century German woodcuts may not affect society as a whole. So like, sometimes the best I could do was talk about how it would push my field forward. But ideally shoot for both, right? Like your field and society as a whole. You really want to articulate why this work has to be done by you, why you're uniquely qualified. It's not a resume and narrative form, but say you're talking about archival work and you've laid out a timeline for when you want to complete that. You want to show them you have the experience to do something like that, based on this other project I did, I think it'll take me about this many months, to spend time in the archive, collect the things I need, and then start writing. You want to think about how this project supports your long-term educational and professional goals. Super important. Nobody wants to give you money if they think it's like a one-off and then you're done and you're never going to look at it again. Now, in the case of PhD students, you're already halfway there because it usually involves something for your dissertation, whether it's research or writing. So that helps you get, halfway there, but then you have to really flesh it out. And what are your professional plans after you finish your graduate degree? I remember when I was in grad school, I had to really think about that. Like I was just trying to keep my head above water and I wasn't even thinking about that. And I was like, oh wait, that's the whole reason I'm doing this. So you want to give a brief state of the research, / necessary background information. It'll kind of depend on the field, right? I think I think a lot of people do state of the research. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about the order in which to introduce some of this information. Do not start with the state of the research / background. That is everybody's urge. It's always my urge, but it's the least effective way to open an essay. But spoiler alert for the next slide. So you want to really think about what methods you'll use. And again, this is specific to fields, but there's always methods. Like a lot of times creative and performing arts students will say to me, well, I don't have methods. I don't have a timeline. I'm like, yes, you do. And if you're struggling with timeline, you'll see the next one's what's a realistic timeline for this work. Because a lot of times the funding may be for 4 months, 6 months, 9 months. How are you going to get to a reasonable stopping point while you have the funding? Divide it into phases, right? Like give them just enough detail about the timeline to be convincing, because timelines are going to change and they know that. But like I had a student doing a creative project. She was proposing to do a project in Poland through a Fulbright award. So she was going to initially be doing research. Then she was going to be writing a composition, right? Like writing a piece of music. And then she was going to be working with local artists to perform it. And she was specifically working on a Polish composer, like somebody that she wouldn't have access to their work here in the United States. And everything was going to be based on that person's work. So I was like, there you go, that's a timeline. It's 3 phases, right? Like, even if you don't know exactly how long those phases are going to take, it shows the reviewers that you've thought about this. But that's an example of how somebody did it, with a project that was fully on the like creative and performing arts side. And you want to think about what the anticipated results will be and how you might share the outcomes. Let's go back and use that. I think, we always think about anticipated results and sharing outcomes as being something STEM specific. In this case, that student, they performed the piece in Poland and then she came back and she worked with a group to perform it here as well. So, think about how you're going to share the results of your work. I mean, also think of a plan B in case everything explodes, right? Like if everything blows up in your face, you don't want to talk about the plan B extensively in the research statement because like, obviously we want to believe that this is all going to happen, but I'm a pragmatist. I always like it when a student acknowledges, right? Like, basically if this thing that I'm hoping happens doesn't happen, reassuring the reviewer that the whole thing isn't going to fall apart. Like you have an idea to pivot and keep going. I'm gonna stop for a hot second. Does anybody have any questions before I bust into the order in which I would suggest introducing information? Any cyberspace questions, Justin Singleton?
Not yet, I'll probably do the figures.
Okay, y'all can stop me at any point, it's cool. And I'm actually having way more fun talking about research than I usually do, which is exciting. I actually don't enjoy research myself, which is why I'm in administration, but I really enjoy thinking about your research. It's super, super fun. So I think I'm in the right line of work. I don't have to do research myself, but I listen to you all talk about it all the time. So I mentioned you don't want to start with the background information, which is, I think, the way most of us are taught to write. So you really want to think about getting to the point early. You're the expert in this situation, right? So the green triangle on the left, this is how experts tend to talk about their work. They start with the background, they give the supporting details, and then they get to the main point. We want to flip that triangle on its end. You're the expert. If you were pitching to other experts, that might be how you would approach it. Like if you were, pitching it to somebody who's in your field, in your subfield, and an expert on this topic, right? That might work. When you are pitching, your research in a fellowships context, you want to start with the bottom line, right? Like, here's what I'm going to do, here's why it's important, and here's why I'm the person to do it. And you're going to do it in a paragraph. I challenge you, okay? Then you're going to go fill in the background information and the supporting details. Like, then you can explain to us a bit more, like the state of the research, why you're the person to do this, why it's important in your field and beyond. But you want like a really solid intro paragraph that hits on like the who, what, when, where, how, why. And one of my faculty friends used to always say, what's the so what, right? That's what you want to give them. What's the so what? Like, why should the average person care about this? And remember, we're now on the orangish red triangle on the right, where we're pitching to non-experts. And a lot of times with reviewers for these different awards, it's a college educated audience, but they may not be in your field. Like the Fulbright student program, when students are applying for that particular opportunity, the reviewers could be in any field ever. And so you have to sell your research in a way, that appeals to any of them in that room potentially. But even like National Science Foundation, students will be like, well, there are other scientists. I'm like, science is huge, dude. Okay, like think of life sciences and just how big life sciences are. And that's like the header you submit under is life sciences. So I was like, the odds of this person being like in your subfield, or God forbid, an expert on your project, it's just like very, very small chances of this happening. So remember, I would say, unless you're applying to like the National Institutes of Health, there's going to be a certain amount of distilling your research for a non-expert. So pretty much you are always working with that triangle on the right-hand side. So you're starting with the bottom line, you're giving us the so what, and then you're giving us the background and supporting details. I like this little diagram, and like, this is cheesy, but when I'll be doing my own writing, I'll actually like picture it in my head and be like, oh no, I went too far into the background before I, because like it's that intro paragraph that's so challenging, like trying to fit that all in a paragraph without going like way into the weeds. So in your first one or two paragraphs, I could give you one or two, okay? Before you start going into the background information, what you want to do, why you want to do it, why it's important in your field and beyond. And I think also why it's important that you do the work, right, of all the other people that could potentially be applying for this. I probably need to add a little checkpoint. So you got a lot to do in that first one or two paragraphs. Then you can launch into background information and supporting details. This is like, as somebody who looks at like tons of fellowships applications, successful and otherwise throughout a year, like the year, I also review at the national level for a couple of awards. This could make or break you, this piece right here. Like when I'm reviewing and I've got 50 files in front of me, if somebody wants to make me work for stuff, I'm just like, next, they're skimming. It is a rare reviewer that's sitting reading word for word. I had an interesting interaction with a student one time who was like, are you gonna actually read my essay? They were sitting with me and I was giving them feedback and I was like, this is how reviewers look at them. Like they're basically speed reading, they're skimming. So like if you are like in that first paragraph, bam, they already feel like you're bringing them along for the ride, and I think they're more likely to be open to what you have to say. So their eyeballs are tired and like, I'm also a super lazy reviewer and I know I'm not the only one, so. Yeah. Okay. All right, this is the real test, okay? Does anybody remember what this photo is from? You guys are probably too young, I probably need to find a newer photo. Does anybody remember? We've got two folks in hazmat suits out in front of the US Capitol. So this was the anthrax scare circa 2001. Yeah, this was like when I was in graduate school, when I was your age. So you might wonder why I'm putting this image up. So initially, when this happened, the panic was so very real. Think about like, the beginning of the COVID-19 panic, and it's like you have very little information, but you're very scared. So this is what the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, had on their website. I don't know about you, this would not have helped me to feel any better about what was going on. And I think the big issue here, they're not thinking about their audience. This is how you might talk to a colleague who's also in infectious diseases. This is not how you're going to talk to the American public. So this is an extreme example, but bear with me. So everybody panics even more, and they switch it to this. Because really, all I care about is it curable? That's all I care about. So think about that in terms of like when you're distilling your research. And I say distilling, sometimes what's funny is it's always like students will go talk to their dissertation advisor and they'll be like, oh, my advisor said don't dumb down the research. You're not dumbing down the research, you're pitching it. You're pitching it to a particular audience. And I think something else that's very important is jargon. Right, like this whole thing is basically jargon. You have to break that down. If you have to use a particular term, like say you have to use gram positive throughout the whole essay, what you'll need to do is first define it, and then you can use it. But if you can avoid the jargon entirely, even better. Because I'll ask students sometimes, I'll be like, well, what does this word mean? I'll be like, well, it basically means receptors in the brain. Right? I'm like, can we just say that? And they're like, oh yeah, I guess we could. So you're not dumbing it down, you're pitching it. You're making it more appealing to a particular audience. So like your biggest question when you're thinking about knowing your audience is, are they in your field or are they non-experts? Now here's the other thing. If you bust out your research statement and you want to show it to somebody else to see if you're effectively communicating your research, which by the way, research communication is like a very sexy topic right now. So you're welcome. But if you want someone to look at it, going to somebody in your lab, if you're a scientist, is not the best way to go about it. I would go find a friend of yours who's in a completely different field, or go find your grandmother, or go find somebody who knows nothing about this. Because chances are the reviewer is going to know nothing or very, very little. So that's why you're thinking about, to what extent do I need to distill my research? I mean, something like Fulbright, where it's like reviewers from any field, I tell students like, you gotta break it down. National Science Foundation, yes, you do at least know that they're in science, but science is huge. So there's that. And then you have the National Institutes of Health. I always like to throw shade at them because they don't care. Like you could just throw the technical stuff at them and they're like, that's cool. Sounds good to us. And think about the awards that are of interest to you and what their priorities might be as a funding agency. Do any of you have like a particular award that's of interest to you, like a particular fellowship at this point? Or are you just more interested in all the things? No, nobody has anything in particular in their line of vision. Okay, that's cool. So once you do though, think about how you're gonna have to distill that down. Just a kind of a nod to what we'll be doing at the next session. I just want to like lay out how a research statement and a personal statement work together. So really the research statement, oh God, I have statement of purpose again. They all are más o menos the same thing. It's just the last time I gave this presentation, somebody specifically wanted me to call it that. But the research proposal is about your research. The personal statement is about you and your educational and professional journey as a researcher. So, two very different pieces there. A lot of times, okay, so something that that makes my heart hurt, okay, is when I see somebody, like they hand me a personal statement and there's citations in it. There shouldn't be references, there shouldn't be citations. It's about you and you're the expert on you, so you shouldn't need to do any of that kind of stuff. You know, you're writing it in the first person. I think some of you, particularly scientists, might be used to writing in the third person. I don't know if they still do that, but it's like super awkward. So statement of, like, the research statement is about your research, and you know, specifically you're thinking about the audience and how you're going to pitch this to them and to that funding agency. Whereas the personal statement is about you and your educational and professional journey, like where you've been, what you're doing now, and where you want to go. So you don't want to forget about that professional trajectory there either. Whereas in the research statement, you're talking specifically about how this research is going to help you get there. These two essays will need to function separately, but also part of a whole, and you never know which one the reviewer is going to read first in a given application packet. So, you know, you can't say, oh, well, they'll have gotten that because they read the research statement first. You don't know that. Also, they're not going to work that hard. You know, so you don't want to have outright repetition, but don't assume that they're going to bop back and forth. You know, if there's a certain fact they want to check on. And this is where mapping out, you know, what's going to go where before you start writing, like that act of outlining is incredibly important. Unless it is the traditional statement of purpose and you have to combine both, right? But again, you want to get to the main ideas early on. We won't even go there today. Usually it's two separate documents, personal statement and then a research statement of some sort. That sometimes they'll give it different names, but basically something about you, something about the research. And Jesse, do you want to talk about the incentives for the program? I've tossed this back in there. I hope that's okay.
Yeah, no, it's.
People like knowing these things, yeah.
Yeah, so really quickly for our folks in the room, how many folks attended our first session? A couple people attended our first ones. Most of our folks online are attendees from our first session. So we relaunched our grant writing support series. It's the grant writing skills series this semester. You may have known it previously as the funds program last year. And we have changed the requirements and made it a little more targeted at student need to get you what you need to be able to be successful. And so if you attend all three of the grant writing skills workshops, that's the first step. This is session number 2. And so if you did both, you're already partially the way there. Attend at least one of our writing mini retreats here in this room. Come back, bring your stuff you're working on, just write on it, ask us some questions. We'll be there to try and help support you through that. And if you need, we can catch you with the writing coach out front there for targeted help. Attend one of those. Set up a meeting with Angel Diaz. Angel is unfortunately out sick today, so he couldn't be here. He's our coordinator for student success and fellowships at the graduate school. This is actually his initiative. He's going to be taking over. He's going to be with us. But meet with him once just to chat over your application, ask questions, make sure you're squared away, and then submit your application for funding. If you do all that, we'll give you a bookstore gift card. So you can go get some UTEP swag, a mug, a t-shirt, something to show off. I recommend a shirt or a sweatshirt. You can put your grant sweatshirt to celebrate your achievement in doing that. It's always fun to have something like that. It's kind of like, it's just a UTEP sweatshirt, but for you, you know it's special, right?
I say save it to by birthday.
Or you can buy
but that's just me.
Yes.
Like when I was in grad school,
Yeah.
that's what I would use it for. So I'd be like, look what I got you.
I have a couple pieces of apparel that are very special. I have actually my Purdue hat is a very specific hat that I can buy in the bookstore, but it's very specific. I got it for very specific. Everyone has their own thing. But if you do all of those things, you'll get a gift card. However, it doesn't have to be within one semester, right? And so if you don't submit your application until next fall, we're going to track you guys' participation, right? And so do these at some point while you're working on your application, you'll get a bookstore. And
cool.
have the most successful application you possibly can have by participating in this. So that's the whole goal here, is just to find some way to help you be more successful at these grants.
And have a mad skill set that you can use beyond a particular application. Yeah.
True statement.
Yeah, well, and I think this is my motivational speech, right? Is like, if you listen to the faculty talk, like, okay, so like Dr. Kirkin, who's the dean of the College of Science, I heard him do this thing where he talked about like, so like he gets all kinds of grants, this guy, all right? But like, if you look at the list of grants he didn't get, like it's bananas, but he learned through all of that and now has this amazing skill set. You know, so it's one of those things, successful or not, you're still successful because you're walking away with the skill set. So and I know that sounds really like rose-colored glasses, but it's very true. Students come back to me all the time and like, hey, you know, this one thing didn't work out, but I got this other super cool. Or, like I have a student who didn't get the Fulbright, but he got this huge fellowship to start his PhD next year in the United States, as opposed to, you know, doing research in Ireland as he initially planned. You know, so there's the process is the product, as one of my faculty colleagues would say. So if you need any information about external funding, funding specific to UTEP, any of that kind of stuff, that would be gradfund@utep.edu. So that's Angel and Jesse Singleton. If you are interested in the Fulbright student program and or the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship specifically, that is me. So that's my email down there, jlgreen@utep.edu. Just a quick rundown for anybody who doesn't know, the Fulbright is funding to do research or teach English overseas for a 9-month period. For PhD students, this can be an amazing opportunity to do dissertation research if you have any, you know, reason to do it overseas. Now, Fulbright, the eligibility criteria unfortunately limited specifically to US citizens. However, if you are a non-citizen and have any research or any reason to do research in Germany, there's a whole other opportunity for that. US citizens can apply for it too. I digress. Anyhow, and I also work, I always want to throw that out because I'm like, oh my gosh, but it's the US State Department, right? So they keep things pretty limited. The National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship, specifically for folks in STEM, including social sciences, and that is 3 years of funding for a PhD. You do have to apply though in your first or second year of graduate school. And once you have a master's, you're unfortunately no longer eligible because that would count as your first or second year of graduate school. But if any of those sound interesting, that's my jam. I don't think I did a very good job selling those, but they're both pretty amazing. And the National Science Foundation, GRFP, it is open to both citizens and permanent residents. Now, sadly, as a humanist, there is no equivalent for us, but nobody wants to pay for your first couple years. But humanists, the money will come later as you're working on your dissertation research and your dissertation writing. Hopefully, fingers crossed. So any questions from the esteemed audience, virtual or in person? Yeah.
You have an example that shows the order in which you have outlined that in the best way to.
Oh, yeah, okay, so I don't have, okay, so at the next one for the personal statement, I do have a set outline that I'll show you that you can use. I don't have a set outline for the research essay or research statement because they vary so much, right? Like a personal statement, there's usually some pretty similar rules. But basically, as long as you start with the who, what, when, where, why, how, that really solid intro paragraph, and then I would move into like a couple paragraphs of background or state of the research, and then you're gonna go into, you know, the deeper discussion of like why you're the person to do this, and you know, like further explaining why it's important, laying out timeline and methods. So that's kind of how I would do it, right? Is like your intro paragraph, background / state of the research. And then what I tell folks to do after that, just make sure you hit on anything that's in the prompt, right? And any of these, but the prompts are very different. Sometimes they'll even lay out for you exactly what they want you to do. So I'm always a little reticent to give you all like a straight up outline. So that is a long-winded way of saying, no, unfortunately, I do not have that. But use this as kind of like, use this and the prompt as kind of a checklist once you've laid out the facts in the background. Any other questions?
Thumbs up, so nobody's got a question.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Can we get these slides?
I don't know if we're gonna distribute the slides, but we'll do it via YouTube or?
Yeah, so we are recording this right now, so we want to say share the slides, but we will have the recording.
Okay.
And so, all of the, it looks like, All of our workshops that we can reasonably record, we record and post to our workshops and events page on our website, the Graduate School's webpage. And then we post these under the funding tab, on the funding section of the workshops and events page. If you have any trouble finding that, email Graduate and we'll send you the link and let you know where it's at. We don't directly share slides typically, we typically share the recording. That way you have the context that goes along with it, maybe the just add an extra versus just a slide.
That's a really good point. Well, and always, use the prompt as your guide, but sometimes the prompt will just be like, tell us about why your research is cool and you're awesome. And you're like, okay, well, that's not helpful. So then, you've got some talking points. Oh, I'm not gonna go all the way back, but yeah, I tried to hit on like the stuff that I see most frequently in terms of expectations for what is or isn't included in a research statement. I hope y'all come back to talk about personal statements. Personal statements are my favorite, and I think they give people a lot of, like I said, a lot of trepidation, but being able to talk about yourself is super important, not just in a fellowships context, but also like when you go out looking for jobs, right? Like when you're doing an interview, the ability to tell the story of your educational and professional development is like a low-key superpower. So, I always tell folks, like, we're gonna talk about it in the context of a personal statement, but I think you're going to find that, some of the talking points you develop through that are going to help you well beyond, just the context of a personal statement as part of a fellowships application. So I'll hang out if anybody has questions. If you don't, that's cool. Oh, we got a question.
Yeah, the part where you talk about why you are the perfect person to conduct that research.
Sure.
Can you give maybe just one example of the concept, how it should sound?
Oh, sure. Okay, so the question is, when you're talking about your qualifications to do this research, right? Like why you are the person to carry out this research. So it could look a lot of different ways, right? And I think you all will tend to err on the side of being overly modest. So it's okay. You said, how would you phrase that potentially? Based on my experience at Pacific Northwest National Laboratory working on this, right? Like I became very experienced with CRISPR and now I'm just making this all up. I sound really sciencey though, right? I gained this experience with CRISPR that I'll apply to this project. It's going to enable me basically to get results faster, right? Like hit the ground running, get results faster, and be able to get on to the open question, right? Like, and I didn't really use the term open question, but I think a big part of this is thinking about the open question. Like, what is that question that nobody's been able to answer in your field, and you might be able to start moving in that direction? I don't necessarily expect you to answer it because that's like huge, but that's another way you can kind of think about it when you're trying to figure out why this is important in your field and beyond. Particularly in your field, maybe you're answering or laying the foundation to answer an open question in your field. Those to me are some of the sexiest research essays I read. I'm just like, yeah, we don't know this thing, right? And then like I get all invested, and it's because whoever's written it is doing such a good job of pitching it to me, the non-expert. And I'm thinking specifically of science projects, like humanities projects. I can mostly pick up. I don't want to say anything, but I can look at a lot of humanities projects and mostly know where they're going with it. Whereas with science, I have no idea, but if they can bring me along for the ride, I'm like, yeah, answer that open question. I love that feeling. Kind of awesome. So I hope that helps. But you will have to lean into your awesomeness a little bit and be like, I had this really cool experience. It's one of those things where you want to you don't want to go into it extensively because chances are, if you bet it at Pacific Northwest National Lab, that's going to figure into your personal statement, and the story of your educational and professional development, but you're showing it as a specific example of how you're ready to do this work. Cool. So we're all done. I'll hang out to answer questions if anybody has any. Any cookies that get left here, Jesse and I will be forced to eat all of them, and our metabolisms are much slower than y'all's, so I would ask that you please take them with you. All right, thank you for coming. I hope to see everybody, or mostly everybody, some people for personal statements.